Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 331 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, we're talking about what to do if you feel like you're walking on eggshells with your team. Now, this is not a good place to be if you feel like you are walking on eggshells, so I'll talk about what this means and what we can do about it. So let's get into this topic right now. Now, I've noticed a bit of a trend at work over the past, few years, and it's that some leaders find themselves walking on eggshells, trying not to upset people in their team. Now, this phrase, walking on eggshells, basically means to use extreme caution. You're stepping lightly so you don't break the fragile eggshells that are underneath your feet. Now, this can become a big problem for thoughtful leaders, especially when their overly cautious approach starts to mean they no longer lead effectively or authentically. So in this episode, I'm going to take a look at why leaders might find themselves doing this, why thoughtful leaders can be vulnerable to it, and what you should focus on to reduce the chance of it happening to you or fix it if it's already happening. So first thing we're going to talk about is, what's wrong with this? Well, the first problem is that being overly cautious in how you deal with your team is likely to slow down or prevent progress. Now, if you feel that every interaction with your team could end in disaster, you'll stop engaging. You'll avoid interacting with that team member because they're difficult. And rather than hold them accountable, you might pick another battle instead. Now, walking on eggshells can also be draining because rather than act naturally, you'll prepare for and analyze every interaction in case something goes wrong. So have you ever been in a meeting where you feel like if you say the wrong thing, it'll take a bad turn? Now, I certainly have, and it's quite tiring and tense and not a good place to be. And perhaps the worst aspect of walking on eggshells is that by trying not to upset people, you may be setting a precedent in your team that people can get away without being held accountable. Now, you know who hates this the most? People getting away with not doing the right thing? Yep, it's the hardworking and diligent team members who have to pick up the slack for those other people. So why do leaders find themselves in this situation? Because it's natural not to want to upset people in your team. But when this encourages you to avoid tough conversations or giving feedback or making changes, then this can be an issue. And that's when I start to call it walking on eggshells. So one of the first reasons it happens is because leaders are scared of losing people. If an employee gets upset and decides to quit, the remaining people will struggle to get the work done. And this can even be more common when there are specialist skills or experience in the team, which will be hard to replace. There could also be an expert in the team who's the only one who knows about a certain process or system or has certain critical skills. And these people can become single points of failure because if they disappear for any reason, the team will be in trouble. And combined with the difficulty in finding good people out in the market, this can make leaders hesitant to hold people accountable. And I was working with someone recently who their whole department had basically threatened to walk out because of changes going on in the organization, and they eventually came back. But this leader was now in a situation where they were worried to do anything and hold these people accountable because these people were already a bit resentful of the upper management in the organization. And so this person felt like they were, walking on eggshells a lot of the time. Now, walking on eggshells can also occur because of changes to workplace rules and regulations. So when I first started my first corporate job way back in 2002, the rules of the workplace seemed a little simpler. If you did a bad job or you couldn't do your job, you ran the risk of being fired. Now, in most cases, unless you do something that warrants immediate dismissal, it often takes many months to remove someone from a team. So this might start with a formal warning and then eventually move into a performance improvement plan, resulting in dismissal if performance hasn't improved over a period of time. So this process can be quite arduous and time-consuming, so many leaders would rather avoid it. And you can read more about the performance management process and what I think of it on a related article that I'll put in the show notes page. For today, the show notes page is thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/331. Now, if you feel like you're walking in eggshells, by the way, coaching can be a good way to get through that and build your confidence and work out what you should do about the situation. So if you're interested in coaching, possibly working with me, then get in touch on that show notes page. There's a link to my leadership coaching page there. Now, as workplace rules and regulations have progressed, the balance has swung from being on the employer's side, where the company had all the power, towards the employee's side, where the employee has more rights than they did before. And while it's common to long for the good old days when you could get rid of someone more easily, it's worth remembering that these rules change for a reason. The reason is that poor behaviour, favouritism and discrimination were too common, and something needed to change to protect employees from bad employers. And in most cases, these workplace legislation changes are for the better. But some employees take advantage of these, which can be when we start to feel like we have to be walking on eggshells all the time. Now, and the last reason I see for this walking on eggshells is because some people are used to getting away with limited accountability. And this is quite common in large organizations where long-term employees haven't been held accountable in the past. And when a new leader comes in and tries to make a change, there's often a significant pushback. And this can result in the leader backing off and starting to walk on eggshells to try to avoid issues with the team. So why might thoughtful leaders specifically fall prey to this type of thing? Well, over my time working with thoughtful leaders, I've learned that they're often very people-focused. And this can obviously be a great strength, but also a potential vulnerability. Now, if we engage with people with too much empathy, we may be excessively worried about upsetting people at the cost of results. And while results aren't the only thing, a balance needs to be struck between achieving things and supporting your team. So you might argue that taking a people-focused approach will help you to get results. And I'd agree with this to a point, but without a results-focused approach at the same time, your team may struggle to reach their potential. So something that thoughtful leaders also struggle with can be a lack of confidence, overthinking, and the tendency to second-guess themselves. Now, I often find some of my clients believing it's their own fault that something went wrong in their team, but ultimately there are, multiple parties involved in every issue. So this tendency to blame themselves or take accountability for other people's issues can cause them to start doing this thing which we're calling walking on eggshells, when perhaps a more forthright approach would be warranted here. All right, so as a thoughtful leader, what can you do about this? So we know that this situation is not sustainable. We won't be satisfied with it, and over the long term, our team probably won't be either. So here are some ideas to try to prevent it from happening, or at least try to reduce its impact on your team, or you as well. So the first thing is we're trying to future-proof your team. Now, earlier in the episode, I mentioned the concept of single points of failure. Now, these team members can be quite risky because they hold a lot of power and can cause the team to struggle if they're absent for any reason. Now, it can be helpful to try to find ways to reduce the risk associated with these types of people and roles. So one way is to cross-skill other team members by training them in similar skills or helping them gain needed experience. So you might also rotate jobs in the team if it's possible, so people learn about how to do other roles as well. You can look for responsibilities that only a single person can do as well, and these are the risk areas, and you might train other people to do them as well. You could also find an external consultant or contractor who might be able to plug the gaps in case there's some sort of emergency, and also build other relationships with managers who might be able to assist with resources if you really needed them. And it's worth noting that your team might not like it when you try to future-proof your team because they may enjoy the influence they have as the team expert and may even feel threatened. So don't be afraid to expect some pushback, but don't let it stop you from doing the right thing for the team as a whole, which is to make it more sustainable. The second thing I think is worth doing is to get to know your HR team, so your human resources team. because they can be your ally when you're dealing with difficult team members. So instead of avoiding these performance management discussions when you have an underperforming or misbehaving employee, learn how the process works by partnering with whoever your HR person is. So if you build a relationship with that team, if the time comes when you need them, they're more likely to have your back and you'll know what process you need to follow. Otherwise, you could be tempted to avoid the issue altogether, which means you may be letting an underperforming employee off the hook. Another way to prevent this walking on eggshells is to set clear expectations and then reinforce them. Now, this one seems obvious because it might just seem like good leadership, but it seems like it should be included here because if you feel like you need to walk on eggshells because a long-term employee is resisting your efforts to hold them accountable, it's best to make your expectations quite clear and then follow through on those expectations. So if someone's been getting away with poor behavior or performance for years, it will require a bit of a reset, and this might come as quite a shock to them. So document your discussions in writing, send the employees a summary of what was discussed. If they don't hold up their end of the bargain, it's time to apply the consequences. So as in the previous point, consult your HR team so you know what you should be documenting, where you should be documenting it, and when. And this will all feed into the performance management process, which hopefully you won't need, but if you do need it, you'll know how it works. Now, another thing that I find useful is to reframe your people-pleasing behavior. So if you're walking on eggshells, it might be because you're afraid of hurting people, because you like to help people. But it's worth asking the question whether you're really helping by avoiding that difficult conversation, for example. You might be hurting someone by not providing the feedback and the opportunity to improve. And you're definitely hurting the good people who are watching if you do nothing about the situation. So once again, you want to reframe that people pleasing. It might feel helpful to not have a difficult conversation with someone because they might not like it, but actually you're hurting yourself and others, and you're actually hurting that person by not giving them the feedback they need to improve. So the last tip I've got for you here is to look after yourself because you might be in it for the long haul. So sometimes I meet leaders who have pretty much given up. They say things like, well, it's too hard to address the problem. I'm just focusing on other things now. And unfortunately, this is how poor performers win because the good people give up. So look after yourself physically and mentally so you can turn up to work in a good space or as near to it as you can be. Because if you feel like you need to walk on eggshells, it's likely that fixing the situation will require persistence and consistency, and that's pretty hard to bring when you're burning out. So given this is the case, if you're someone that's walking on eggshells, what are you going to do about it? And the answer might be, well, I'm going to quit my job and go somewhere else. But hopefully not, because what I also find is that when we have these sorts of issues in one workplace, they often translate into future workplaces because they are based on patterns of behavior that we are bringing to the situation. So walking on eggshells is not sustainable, and you won't be able to make the progress you need if you're overly cautious and hesitant. Now, you don't have to keep walking on eggshells, and you don't need to do it by yourself either. You can lead with both empathy and a results focus, and hopefully you can find trusted colleagues and partners, or you can work with me in coaching to try to help you get over this challenge and create a better, more sustainable culture in your team. So I'm interested in your thoughts on this one. Do you find yourself walking on eggshells? Why is that? And what are you going to do about it? Put a comment on the show notes page or on Spotify as well. You can find it on Spotify, or thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/331 is where you can leave it on the show notes page on my website as well. Also, if you have not already, I would love it if you could take a few seconds to leave a positive review, like 5 stars if you can, on your podcast app of choice. It helps me to get the word out about Thoughtful Leader and help leaders who listen to this podcast as well and get more of them listening. So thank you for listening. Keep up the thoughtful leadership, and I'll be back next week.